It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us today to talk to us about Dorothy Day, who wrote the book Dorothy Day, An Introduction to Her Life and Thought. Dr. Terrence Wright, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why did you want to write a book about Dorothy Day?
Dorothy Day for a long time has been one of my heroes, and so in some sense this was just a labor of love of all these years of sort of reading her and thinking about her. Really driven by two kind of reasons. One is, I think Dorothy Day is one of those figures that sometimes people know the name but really don't know much about her, and there really wasn't a good sort of introductory book out there. There's a lot of very good books on Dorothy Day, but one that would just let somebody kind of have an introduction and an overview and then decide what they might want to read beyond that. So I thought that filled that need, but also that I sometimes think that Dorothy Day is very oftentimes misunderstood. She can often be misunderstood, for lack of a better term, as being a sort of dissenting Catholic, and I was trying to argue in the book that she's actually a very faithful daughter of the Church and that her life is very much one of faith.
Yeah, I want to get into the dissenting part a little bit and that controversy. Before we do, though, can you talk a little bit about her story pre-conversion?
She has a very powerful life story. She always sort of felt drawn to religion, but sort of had kind of tried to push it away, tried to push God away. And in her early life, she leaves the university, gets a job as a journalist, and also becomes a nurse. In her personal life, really takes a very difficult turn. When she's 21, she's involved with a man who's 8 or 9 years older than her, and she ends up pregnant, and he insists that she have an abortion, and as soon as she has the abortion, he abandons her. And so she is reeling from both the abandonment and the abortion. She actually attempts suicide a couple of times, and then sort of on the rebound of that, marries a man that she doesn't love, and that marriage fails and only lasts less than a year. So there she is, about 23 or 24, with having had an abortion, a failed marriage, and just a very sort of difficult period of her life. And it's really kind of coming out of that darkness that is so central to her entering the Church.
Yeah, so what did cause her to convert?
She was always attracted to the Catholic Church. She actually even sometimes would go to Mass or benediction even when she didn't really understand what was going on. I think she was somewhat drawn to just the beauty of the ceremony. But when she was in her mid-20s, she falls in love with a man called Foster Batterham, who also loves her very much better relationships than her earlier ones. Finds that she's pregnant again. And it's really that pregnancy that really leads her to believe that God has forgiven her for her earlier sins. And she just has that experience for her as a profound experience of God's mercy. And so she decides that she's going to have her daughter baptized. Foster Batterham, the father of her daughter, does not want to get married, and he's an anarchist and doesn't believe in marriage, so he will not do that. So she decides that she is going to have her daughter baptized Catholic because she wants her daughter to have the moral foundation she never had, but she also then comes to realize that she cannot raise her daughter Catholic if she herself isn't Catholic. So she enters the Church and she ends her relationship with Batterham and takes off begins her life at that point as a single mother. So, but it's really that second pregnancy, I think, is the key to understanding her decision to enter the Church.
And she's really become known for the Catholic worker movement and getting that going. What was going on in the Church or the nation or the world at the time that she started that?
It begins during the Great Depression. In a certain sense, it begins in 1932 when she meets Peter Maurin. What Peter Maurin wanted to do, and even Dorothy Day up to that point was sort of unaware of it, was to make what we now call Catholic social teaching, what the Church Fathers and the popes have had to say on social issues, to really bring that to the people, which he thought the Church had not done effectively. And so drawing from the encyclicals like Rerum Novarum and Quadragesimo Anno, but also from the teachings of Church Fathers and philosophers, he really wanted to bring that message out there and thought that in the situation of the suffering of the Great Depression with so many people unemployed and homeless, that moment in history really was the key to starting that movement, which focused on the spiritual and corporal works of mercy.
So at what point did the Catholic worker movement form and, I guess, develop into a national movement?
Well, she and Peter Maurin, their meeting is kind of interesting because Day was in herself was sort of looking for what she was going to do with her life and how she could bring together her Catholicism and her sort of passion for the poor. And she prays. She goes to, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, she goes to the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., and prays about this. And the next day, she meets Peter Maurin. And Peter Maurin had sort of a vision of what he called houses of hospitality, where people would take care of each other with regards largely of the corporal works of mercy, the feeding of the hungry, the clothing of the naked, but also that there would be a newspaper that would help bring Catholic social teaching to everybody, to also, in a certain sense, promote the spiritual works of mercy, where, you know, you would counsel the doubtful and rebuke the sinner and things like that. So it really starts in about 1933 with the first time the newspaper is published is in May of 1933. They open up the first houses of hospitality, and it slowly grows into a movement in such that these houses of hospitality, other people are attracted to that, and they start opening them in other cities. Maurin and Day opened one in New York City, but other people start opening them around the country. So they were always sort of loosely affiliated with Day and Maurin sort of overseeing it, but since they were all sort of interested in subsidiarity where things were done on a local level, each house was sort of an independent house in that sense, and they're sort of loosely affiliated. That movement started in the early 30s, and it's still going today. I mean, there's probably over 200 Catholic worker houses around the world.
We're talking about Dorothy Day with Dr. Terrence Wright. You can read about her in his book, Dorothy Day, An Introduction to Her Life and Thought. And in the book, you dig into her writings. Can you tell us about those? Like, what was she writing about and for whom?
Well, she was a very talented writer. I mean, she had published a novel before entering the church. She had also been a screenwriter in Hollywood for a brief time. But after her conversion, she writes a couple of sort of spiritual autobiographies because people wanted to know her story. But then she also just wrote about her day-to-day experiences in the Catholic worker. And so she had a talent for that writing, and then she also wrote on some of the saints. There's quite a bit of her own writings out there, and so I try to, in my book, draw on those writings as much as possible to really show that this is, you know, to give her voice speaking these and not just me kind of recounting them.
One of the things you mentioned earlier here during the interview, but also in the book, that some people like her because she was a dissenting Catholic and others don't like her because of that. But you argue that she wasn't a dissenting Catholic. Can you explain where this controversy comes from?
I think part of it arises from she was not afraid to be critical of the church, or church leaders at least, not because she was criticizing the teachings of the church, but because she thought those church leaders weren't fulfilling those teachings well enough. And so because she was willing to be critical, I think some people thought, oh, she rejected the teachings, which really isn't true. So she really wasn't dissenting in that way. It is the case that she took political stands, if you will, or social stands that were not particularly popular. And so that made her sort of seem on the fringe. And I think she got this reputation of being sort of dissenting. And I think, and so some people like that about her, you know, oh yeah, when they embrace her, but others reject her, but I think without really looking at what she actually said and did.
How has Dorothy Day inspired you?
One of the things that I really, over the years, have become more and more drawn to in Dorothy Day was her understanding of St. Teresa of Lisieux's Little Way. She writes a book on St. Teresa, and she calls her the saint of the responsible, and that we're not all going to be witnessing to Christ in the sense of founding the Catholic worker movement, but most of us, it's about doing the things that need to get done every day, that if you don't do them, someone's going to suffer, and that we have to do those small things with great love. And the importance of that as a parent, just see that a lot of your day is taken up with doing things that have to get done, or your children aren't going to get fed, or something else isn't going to get done. And it's those small acts that we really embody our witness to Christ. And I think she sees that. I mean, the Catholic worker really was about serving these particular people on a small scale. And for Dorothy Day, a lot of people who came to the Catholic worker were interested in changing the world, but didn't want to chop the vegetables. And you know, you have to chop the vegetables. or people are going to go, the food line, the bread line won't happen, the soup line won't happen. And so it's that sort of understanding that, it's really what you do on this everyday level that's key, I think is one of the big takeaways that I've taken from Dorothy Day over the years.
Yeah. Where is she in her journey towards sainthood?
Her cause is moving forward. In 2000, the Vatican accepted her cause such that she was proclaimed a servant of God, which is the first step. Mm-hmm. They opened up the guild for her canonization in 2005, who was responsible for collecting the testimonies and stories about Day and so on and so forth, also in hopes of the maybe miracles that can be attributed to her. In 2013, I believe it was, Cardinal Dolan asked the American Catholic bishops to endorse her cause, and they did so. It's moving along. We know that St. Francis actually spoke about Day when he was here in the United States, and so there's hope that this cause will move forward, but canonizations are slow processes.
Where can people get a copy of the book so they can learn more about Dorothy Day?
They can get it from Ignatius Press, who publishes it. It's available on Amazon, probably in some bookstores, Catholic bookstores maybe, around the world.
All right, again, it's called Dorothy Day, An Introduction to Her Life and Thought. And we've been joined by the author, Dr. Terrence Wright. Thank you for joining us today and sharing about the life of Dorothy Day.
Thank you very much.